truth. I did it because I got married when I was 20 years old and had 2 little girls and needed a job, and that's why I got into TV. It's not a great story of someone who is like deeply trying to shape the world, right? That wasn't my reasoning for it. And I spent a lot of years just doing kind of general broadcast media. And then in 2008, 2009, my view of things shifted a lot. And that had to do with the fact that I was working on the Texas-Mexico border. That's where I grew up. That's where my wife grew up. Most of our kids grew up there for most of their lives. And I was a journalist there. I was a news anchor there. I had worked for Fox there for a long time and for NBC, and had covered border issues for a long time. And then in 2008, 2009, the drug war in Mexico came to the city of Juarez. And it was an incredibly violent war that took place there. And we were watching thousands upon tens of thousands of people die every year in that city in brutal, violent ways. So violent that at the time, Juarez was the most dangerous city in the world. Even more dangerous than Baghdad. And at the time, in 2008, 2009, there was a lot of fighting still going on in Baghdad. And so it was an incredible time. And as I was covering what was happening there, the networks began to send down reporters and journalists to cover what was going on there in Juarez. And what I saw as I would watch their coverage is that a lot of the information they were giving was wrong. Surprise. But I actually was surprised, right? Because I was working for an NBC station, and my understanding was, look, there's what's going on. There's obviously context to stories and details to stories, but they're pushing these ideas that were untrue. And so I began to email and contact the producers of those segments who were working for NBC and Fox at the time and saying, hey, listen, I understand you guys have correspondence here. You're covering what's going on here, and that's great. I'm glad that you're here. But I go over every day. Like, we would drive over every morning into Mexico, and many times we drive across and there would be a line of headless bodies hanging from an overpass, right? That's the first thing you'd see when you go in. And then we would cover just the horrific things happening there. And I would say, so I'm there every day, and I understand you guys are trying to cover it from someone who hasn't really been here. I would love to be able to talk to you guys about what we're seeing, because the way that you guys are telling the story is incorrect. And didn't get emails back, didn't get responses, didn't have them say, oh, we think we know what we're doing, or, we're not really interested, or tell us what you have. There was just no response at all. And it went on for some time until I realized they weren't ever going to respond, because for the first time, I realized that there was a narrative that was coming from the network, and it didn't matter what was actually happening. It didn't matter who was being affected. It didn't matter the spiral of violence that was taking place. The narrative they wanted to push was going to be pushed. And so for me, there was a lot of awakening that happened during that time. The other thing that happened was that my wife said, we're going to need to leave here because you're going to get yourself killed. And she got really tired of me going over every day and covering what was going on there. And my agent called me and said, there's an offer for you to go to Cincinnati, Ohio, to the Fox station there. And I was like, this is sounding awful. But my wife said, I think we need to go. And so my kids wanted to go, and so we decided to go ahead and try something new, and we went there. Now, I went from covering the most violent, most dangerous city in the world, which was pretty exciting, to moving to maybe the most boring city in the world, in Cincinnati, Ohio. And if anyone here is from Cincinnati, no offense to Cincinnati, because we actually loved Cincinnati. It was an incredible time in our lives. It was great for our kids and for our family, but it is not exactly a place where investigative journalists go to grow, right? It was, you're covering house fires and car crashes all day long, and city council meetings. But I did have a boss who came to me at one point right after I got there and said, hey, news anchors need to have franchises. That was the thing at the time. This was 2010. They need to have franchises, some specific segment they do so that people, know that they're more than just a talking head. And so we're going to give you a franchise. And they had a list of 4 franchises for me. And they said, the first one is Pothole Patrol. I'm not kidding. Pothole Patrol. You get to go out and cover potholes around the city and see if we can get them filled. And then there were a couple of others. And at the bottom, there was one called Reality Check. And I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, they do it in Minnesota, a little station there. And they showed me a clip of it. It was basically Michelle Bachmann Bash. Right, so Michelle Bachmann, who was the congresswoman from Minnesota, it was basically just fact-checking her, which, is like shooting fish in a barrel. It's pretty easy. But they wanted me to go ahead and take a look. I said, well, I'll do that one. Well, it just so happened, this happened in the beginning of 2011. Towards the end of 2011, we started building this franchise. But Ohio, which I didn't know coming from West Texas, isn't just a heavily political place. It is the swing state of all swing states. And it is the place where every potential presidential candidate, every person who has any interest whatsoever in being connected to the White House will not only go once or twice or 3 times or a dozen times, but it becomes this incredible place where politics is just consumed there on a regular basis. And so reality check kind of took off because in 2011, the Republican primary season really heated up there, and we got to interview all the different candidates who were running for president. And one of those candidates was a guy by the name of Ron Paul. That was Ron Paul, right? Who's going to be here in a couple of days, right? And I remember that we were covering what was happening in this election, and one of the ideas was we're going to do a profile on each of the Republican candidates. And we went through each one, and we covered every single one of them. We covered Jeb Bush, and we covered, I'm trying to remember who was running, Mitt Romney, and we covered Rick Santorum. Everybody got their shot. And then we get to the very last one, and I did a piece, and it was called, What's So Wrong with Ron Paul? I actually didn't know anything about Ron Paul, even though we're both from Texas. He's from the other side of Texas, which is probably further away than Ohio. And so he was, I did a little piece about him, and we just covered some of his positions and some of the things he believed. And the next morning, I wake up, I had about 900 Facebook fans. I remember specifically it was 999, because I had interviewed Herman Cain, and we made fun of his 999 plan and used Facebook for that. That's the only reason I remember. But the next morning I wake up, and I have 6,000 Facebook fans. And I was like, what the heck? And they were all these crazy looking people with black things over their eyes. And so it started asking people, like, what's the deal? And who are all these people? And they're like, I can't believe that you would talk about Ron Paul on TV. It was so credible. And there's a media blackout. That's why we all cover our faces, because there's a blackout in the media. Which I was like, it's not true. That's not true. There's no blackout of Ron Paul. And then they would say, no, there is a blackout. Look at the way you guys cover him. Look at the way the Fox covers it. So I started looking at it and kind of actually, okay, let's look at the polls. And when they would do polling and who's in first place, and then who's in third place, and who's in fourth. Wait a minute, why do they remove second place? And I actually look at the poll. Ron Paul's name's there, right? And so for me, there was this incredible awakening of not just what I had seen in covering the stories in Mexico, but now seeing what was happening in politics and how corrupt not only the political system is, but how corrupt the media is in being complicit with that political system. That it actually becomes an arm of the political parties. And so for me, there was a huge awakening. I credit my awakening to Dr. Ron Paul more than any other person to completely shift the way that I think. I hope for those of you who have been awakened by him, you understand that concept, right? It's incredible. And so for me, it became a push of, well, it's not just about Ron Paul. It's about things that he talks about that don't get covered. And if there are things he talks about that can't get covered, what else can we not talk about? What else can we not cover in media? And so over the next 5 years began a process of me shifting through and working through what that looked like and what that process looked like. And it's been an incredible process. And then I ended up in Atlanta, working for the CBS station there in Atlanta. And as I was doing that, Reality Check came there with me, and it really blew up there. It became incredibly successful. We did 110 million video views in 1 year of the stuff that we were doing there. And we compare that to what like Vice News was doing, if you know who they are. We were absolutely crushing them. I mean, there were so many tens of millions of people consuming our content and listening to it. And then all of a sudden, in the beginning of January 2017, everything got shut down. And because we covered some very controversial stories. You may be familiar with some of those stories, right? But as that happened, you know, as we covered some of those stories, I was basically hit with an ultimatum. Shut it all down or go find a new place to work. And was really stuck at that point. And so I said, okay, I'll shut it all down. So I shut it down. And for 1 year, it was completely shut down where I looked for a way to bring back the project that I was working on. And then at the end of 2017, I was approached by some guys from Dash and Dash Digital Cash who said, hey, we have a treasury system that's used to fund projects that promote the coin. You should put in a bid. And so I did. I put in a bid. And so I put this bid forward, and it was accepted, and we began off and running independent again using Dash. And as I mentioned to you before, we did 4 months with them, and then we switched over. We were with Smart Cash. We spent 4 months with them. But what happened with both of those coins is that it opened up this whole concept, this whole idea to me of a treasury system. Because for us, our funding was coming through a crypto that had a treasury, but actually Dash and Smart Cash don't have treasury systems designed specifically for this, right? Their treasury systems are designed for their coins. And so out of that was born, let's see if I can advance.
Point toward the audio picture.
Turn which one?
Point to your right.
Point to my right?
Yes.
And then, and you guys, there it is, okay. And then it opened up this idea. So one of the things that happened in 2018, as we were under this deal with Dash and Smart Cash, we came across this problem that began to happen too, which is that independent voices in media started being purged. Facebook started purging everyone in 2018. Twitter started removing users. YouTube started banning users because there was a shift that took place. See, from 2012 until 2016 or so, there was an incredible growth in the market of independent media, but especially on social sites like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, because the average person decided, I no longer need to go to the mainstream media to get the information I need. And they were able to cultivate and gather information from independent media through these platforms. Well, in 2016, after the presidential election, whether you like Donald Trump or you hate Donald Trump, the bottom line is that mainstream media worked very, very hard to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president. So much so that they were so convinced he would not be president, they said he was losing by 15 points the day before the election. And then he wins. And so the shock for a lot of people in media was, wait a minute, we don't actually know what's happening. We have no understanding of what's taking place. But above them, remember I said before, the connection between media and politics. Politicians and those who control politics in America also looked at that and said, we need to get control of what is happening with media in this country. And so the way they've done that is under the guise of, the lie of Russian influence in the election, which did not influence the election. They have pushed this idea, right? It's garbage. They pushed this idea and moved it forward to say, well, we're going to purge all these dissenting voices. So I'm really short on time, but let me just tell you a little bit about what we've done. So we have actually tried to create a new system. I'll skip it, I'll just tell you about it. And it's called Isegoria or ICE Media. And I'm going to be around this afternoon. I'll be outside and I can talk to you guys about it if you're interested. But ICE Media is essentially, the concept is we are creating a decentralized blockchain-based platform on which to give independent media a home, give them a place to be able to cultivate content, documentaries, docudrama, news, to create a 24/7 streaming channel, to create a platform channel similar to YouTube that allows those voices to be heard there, but to also create a treasury system that funds independent media. And so that is the concept that we're working on right now because, again, the basic concept for us is this. There's not a war being waged of ideas anymore. There's a war against ideas. There's one narrative that is allowed in politics, one narrative that's allowed in media, one narrative, period. And I believe that I don't have to agree with you to fight for your right to speak. I believe that all of us should be fighting every day for voices we agree with and for voices we disagree with in order to have a robust debate and robust media landscape that challenges ideas and that shakes the narratives that right now are not leading us toward freedom, but lead us toward tyranny. Guys, I'll be outside. I thank you for your time. Thank you.
All right, so we're here at Anarchapulco 2019. Ben Swann,
hey, how you doing?
Pleasure to meet you.
Good to see you, Jason.
You know, Ben, I first became aware of you when you put out that report that you just sort of silently spoke of about Pizzagate.
Okay. Yep.
Now, I detected that perhaps there's some reason why you don't want to speak about it.
I don't want to get distracted by it. I don't oppose talking about it.
Right.
Like for instance, in the setting we were in right now, it takes up too much time.
Not what
I
it's
actually ended up with so little time that I had to really rush through it.
Right.
So, yeah.
So can you tell us now sort of what happened? Because I think a lot of people perceive that you gave everyone the most unbiased, no accusations, just here are the facts, here are the symbols from the FBI, here's what we know, and then you disappeared. People thought you were dead or something.
They were. Look, I think for people, first of all, who have not actually seen the report, you need to go watch the report. Because it's very difficult to judge it if you haven't even watched it.
Yeah.
And some people try to do that. Unfortunately, a lot of media did that, where they judged it and attacked it.
Right.
Really, I think what happened at its core was, I think the report was very fair. It did not accuse anyone of anything.
Yeah.
As you said, it was actually, I wasn't even the first one to do it. People say you're the first person who talked about Pizzagate. That's not true. Fox, CNN, CBS, NBC, ABC, every single network had actually talked about Pizzagate before I did, when they talked about the guy who walked in with the gun into the pizza parlor.
Right.
So they'd all covered it. The problem was they kept saying that it was a debunked conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton was holding children in the basement of a pizza parlor, which is not what it was. And so all my report did was said, here's what actually is here. Here's what's actually the conspiracy is about, the beliefs are about, and this is what they're based on. But when you kick a hornet's nest, hornets come out. And so there was a lot of attacks and basically did not have the support of the people that I was working for, who did not support it. And even though they'd approved, by the way, approved every single thing that ever went on air, after the fact, they didn't want to stand behind it.
Did you learn anything after the fact that made you go like, aha, that's why it got kicked off?
Yes, but I won't talk about that part here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
and at some point I want to do more with it, to the point where there is a lot there that ties into other things.
Wow.
As they move the laundry out behind us.
Yeah, I'm trying to get that out of there.
But yeah, I've learned quite a few things. But and eventually I want to be able to bring that out in the right format. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Well, Ben, I have to thank you, man. You are absolutely a champion
Thanks,
of
Jason.
independent media. And
Thank
tell
you.
us a little bit, you mentioned it on stage there, but
Yes.
you've got a new platform coming
Yes.
called ISE.
Right, so the ICE platform, ICE Media, you can find out information at isegoria.com, ISEGORIA.com. But that's the platform that we're building specifically for independent media. We want to create a 24/7 streaming channel that can compete with, all the big guys who are out there. We believe that there is a market opportunity that's been created because of Facebook, because of YouTube purging so many independent people from their sites.
And you're not worried about the people who say abolish ISE.
Right, exactly.
You've got a lot of
This is
first-hand-
ISE.
Oh, right, okay. You've got a lot of first-hand experience with the border and all that stuff. Your
Yeah,
family
absolutely.
was right there. And
Yep.
I never heard about that. Decapitated bodies in
Oh
Juarez.
my gosh, yes. Most graphic, most gruesome thing we ever saw was a man's face actually had been cut off and then sewn onto a soccer ball and thrown into a field where kids were playing soccer. I mean, it was one of the things that happens when you have that kind of violence is an intimidation factor that goes with it, where cartels and military, as they're all fighting each other, are trying to out-intimidate the others, and it becomes a pretty gruesome place.
So were you in El Paso? Where in Texas were you?
El Paso. That's where I'm from originally.
And so you were there before there was a wall,
Yes.
and then Juarez was right there, and now
right.
there is
There
a
is.
substantial wall.
There
and
is
do you
a-
think it's made a difference?
So I would say this, I do not think that it's made a difference in El Paso, because El Paso has a lot of border crossings there, and people don't necessarily cross there where the wall would be anyways on foot. The wall is more needed if you're going to have one in other parts of the desert. And a lot of folks will say, well, it's not humanitarian to have a wall. There is so much trafficking of children and women across that border. People who were sold into slavery when they get to the United States. People who go with their kids and allow their kids to cross over, believing they'll get their kids back and never see their children again.
Wow.
It happens on a regular basis there. Border Patrol agents, Customs agents, ICE agents will tell you, this is a common thing that happens. I covered it for years.
Yeah.
And so the idea that strengthening the border is simply a racist idea it's just not true. It's been politicized heavily, but people who say, we have a need to protect these families, what we do, but we need to protect them from coyotes and people who take advantage of them in such horrific ways.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, can't thank you enough,
Jason,
man.
thanks so much.
I hope to
Appreciate
speak
it,
to you
man.
again soon.
All right, thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.
Ben Swann, everybody. Thanks very much.